how could we deal with them in the future? Now, what have we learnt about how to learn in this context? And where are we going to go next? What's the next thing we're going to work on? How might things look in 6 weeks' time? And that was the sort of dialogue. I should say here that I don't think on any occasion it was ever said to a teacher, look, I don't think you taught that well. Even if, a teacher did put in place teaching that I wouldn't have thought appropriate at that point, my response would always be, my initiating discussion would be, child X still seems to have trouble learning that. Any discussion about a teacher's practice, I would come at from the perspective of the child learning. Little Freddie is still having problems comprehending that text, or little Freddie is still having trouble with vocab and so on. And obviously in the next sentence, what can we do? How might we modify the teaching to help him not have those problems? So I'm just saying, I couldn't imagine a situation where I would say to a colleague, look, I don't think you taught that well. Because usually, if little Freddie doesn't learn in that case, it may not be that it's not a good teaching procedure. It may have been that it wasn't appropriate in that situation. And so the idea of having dialogue, well, what should be the dialogue of the professional learning team? I believe it should be really focused on students' learning, students' knowledge, and that the teaching is a means of changing that. It's not a focus on teaching. I think for decades, in fact, we've focused on literacy teaching. I think we really need to focus on literacy learning. And what is the teaching we put in place to lift the learning? Is that okay? Because we're not wanting to say replace teaching. We're saying use the teaching that's most appropriate to where the child is. And the dialogue is, I believe, should always be about learning, not about the teaching. So the processes we need to put in place to build group knowledge, and we can look at that at a particular level in the school, but also at the school level. So what we've looked at is a framework for building a professional learning community. Are you all happy and see? Okay. The next thing that really is going to determine how well your school learns is actually what it understands about learning altogether. Now, what does learning look like? So far, I've been pushing a particular model of literacy. We've talked about what people need to do when they engage in being literate, and what's the teaching I'll use to scaffold that. People are more able to learn if they know what learning looks like. Let me give you an example. Someone said to me recently, eating Vegemite is really, anyone who ate Vegemite is signing their death certificate. That's what this guy, and this guy's a professor of medicine. And so I mean, he's a good friend. I had a reason to believe him. And here am I, sort of, every day from age 5 to age 15 on King Island, I had my 2 rounds of Vegemite sandwiches. And my idea of the ideal death would be to be in a vat of Vegemite, eating my way through it. I just love Vegemite. I mean, when my wife goes to the supermarket, she buys the big pots, and this is foul, this is disgusting. But I can eat it by the spoon. I love it. Vegemite, I love Vegemite. And so I had to engage in some learning. You know, what really is the situation to do with Vegemite? Because as, you know, I mean, we all know the song, We're Happy Little Vegemites. But I always also believed that you could have a song, We're Clever Little Vegemites, because Vegemite, I'd been led to believe, is really good for the brain. And so I wanted to know. So in order to learn more about it, there were some key actions I took. I first of all knew, you know, after I'd done a search on the computer, I knew that I wanted to have a better idea of the health benefits of Vegemite. Yeah, in particular, did it help with senility and old age sort of impacts on reasoning and those sort of things? If I keep eating Vegemite, is it going to help me to maintain my faculties, my mental faculties? Okay. So I had an idea of where I wanted to end up. I knew the questions I wanted to answer. And so I started off doing a search, took out the health benefits of Vegemite. And so I got a whole series of web pages. And because I knew where I wanted to go, I could get rid of a whole lot of them already. I could say, look, that one's probably not relevant, that one is, and so on. I had my existing knowledge about Vegemite. My existing knowledge was wonderful, you know, it's the food of all little Australians, that it's supposed to work, and it comes from, you know, the yeast of beer, so that's even sort of a good reason for keeping it there and having it, and that it really helps you. So, and I had a knowledge of how to learn to some extent, so I knew how to learn about Vegemite. I also had a belief that I could learn about it successfully. So there were aspects of my existing knowledge that were in place for me to learn about Vegemite. And so I started off searching around the computer and around the internet, and I came to one or two pages that they really didn't tell me very much about Vegemite at all. I got more information from the label, which we all know is promotion. I mean, it's advertising. You know, why would you want to believe that? And so I saw where niacin was mentioned, so then I checked out niacin to see what that was all about. And so I accessed two or three more pages, and I was getting little bits of information. I was getting little bits of knowledge. I was finding that, yeah, did seem to be some knowledge, that it was okay for Alzheimer's and things like that. And then I started to put the knowledge together. What I had to do was to pull out two or three patterns. I had to feed all the websites together and draw out two or three patterns of ideas, because if I was going to change my behaviour, I need to have my knowledge almost as a pattern. I've got to have, you know, I've got to take the knowledge out of particular contexts and make it more abstract so I can move it into my contexts, you know, where I live. Because there were real problems. I mean, one problem, and you all probably know this, but I didn't, was that if you look at high salt foods, Vegemite is actually 5 times higher in salt content than high salt foods. So those buckets that I've been spooning down each day, I mean, I could have turned white. That's probably why I'm white. I mean, yeah. So there's obviously a good deal of salt. There's a bit of a concern there. So desalted Vegemite would be probably preferable to the salted stuff.